Okay, greetings everyone, and welcome to the presentation on purpose, claim, tone, and bias. The first thing we're going to talk about is author's purpose. When a writer goes to write something, they always have their purpose clearly in their mind. For example, if they know they're writing a novel, they're obviously writing to tell a story. If they want to win an argument, then they're going to go in to try to convince you, right? So most authors understand what their purpose is before they start writing. There's 4 general purposes for an author to use. Know that we're going to talk about them one at a time, but know that any given text can use multiple purposes at one time, and we'll talk about that. So there are 4 modes of discourse. Now, modes of discourse is another name for author's purpose. So that's the same thing. So whether I say, what's the mode of discourse? Or if I say, what's the author's purpose? I'm asking for the same thing. Okay, so there are 4. The first one is narration, which is text told through time. Anytime there's a story, a lot of the narratives that I've given you, the essays, the Ishmael Bea one, the one you had by Reina Grande this week, those are narratives because they're told through time. A lot of Slater's chapters are also narrative because remember, she's trying to take these really sophisticated psychological studies and she's trying to turn them into storytelling because she thinks that's a better, easier, different way to process this super scientific stuff, right? So she's telling them through story. In the Milgram chapter, you got the story of his life. In Harlow, you got the whole story of his life and the story of all of his monkey experiments. So she's telling stories through time. Next is description. This is the purpose where we are trying to use sensory details so that the reader can picture what's going on, they can smell it, taste it, hear it, feel it, right? All those sensory details. And it's all used to create what's called a dominant impression. A dominant impression is kind of like the main idea of a description. I always tell students, for example, when I used to go to the Minnesota State Fair and I always took the bus, it was before they did the really nice new entrance. You used to enter and you would go climb these stairs and kind of go over this little land bridge that went over the street, and you'd come down. And the easiest way to think about a dominant impression, if I were writing a description of the fair from the top of that bridge before you come down into the fair, if it was a really hot day and I'm describing the fair, my first line might be, it is so hot out here, right? Or maybe if, you know, that it used to enter by the Miracle of Life barn. So if it was a really hot day, you might say, oh my gosh, it smells. Or if you went on the night of a big concert, you might say, it's so crowded, right? And so a dominant impression is your overall thought and feeling about something, and then you kind of launch into a description that talks about the smells, the sights, the taste, how it feels, right? Exposition is writing to inform or explain. The textbook chapters that I've given you so far are considered expository because they are trying to teach you something. So in the operant conditioning textbook chapter, it was trying to teach you about Skinner and behaviorism, right? Okay. Persuasion is trying to convince someone to do something or agree with something. You're trying to change, and we'll get into this next week with rhetoric, but it's trying to change mood, mind, and willingness to act. So persuasion is all trying to convince something. Okay, and those are the 4 basic modes of discourse or author's purpose. So the next thing we're going to talk about is claim, and really I'm just giving another name for something you already know. Claim is the same thing or synonymous as main idea. It's the same thing as thesis. If I ask you for a writer's thesis, I'm asking you for the main idea. If I'm asking you for the thesis, I'm asking you for the claim, right? And so good readers want to know where their author is coming from, right? And so when you think of the claim, it's important to know what overall point a writer is trying to make. And that is the claim. It is the main idea. It is the thesis. All right, next we're going to talk about tone. when we talk about tone, we are also talking about the writer's voice, right? And when you're listening to someone talk, it's super easy to tell how they feel based on how they sound. For example, I don't know if I've told you yet, but I have 2 parrots. You probably can hear them in the background sometime when I'm recording because they're actually in their cages behind me, and sometimes they're noisy, right? So you might hear these whistling or singing going on. That's them. So I have a Congo African Gray. He is almost 21 years old, and he talks all day. And one of the things that he's so good at is mimicking tone. When he talks, he sounds exactly like me. You can't even tell that it's not me talking. And he also mimics my husband's voice as well. And so what he's learned to do is call our children down, right? Because when they're upstairs and I'm calling them down for dinner or something's going on, I call their names from the bottom of the step, and he likes loud talking, and so he's learned that, right? And what I've understood from listening to him is how I sound when I'm angry, because my youngest child's name is Sam, and he can call Sam down, and oh my gosh, it sounds so scary. He'll go, "Sam!" Right? Which is so different than Sam. And so tone of voice, Sam knows how fast to come based on how I say his name, right? And so when we listen to people, it's very easy to infer how they feel. Now in writing, that can be much harder. So how can you tell how an author feels based on writing, right? So you can tell through word choice and sentence structure. That's why we are working on the 6 traits at the same time we're working on this, because it's important for you to understand word choice and sentence fluency. Those 2 things work together to help you understand how an author is feeling. When an author is angry, they're going to use what we call highly connotative word choices, right? You're going to know they're mad based on the words that they use. So you have to listen to the connotation of a word, and you've got to pay attention to the way the sentences are structured. So connotative word choices suggest a highly subjective tone, and a lack of connotative word choices in a text suggest an objective tone. So if you don't have connotative word choices and you're very objective, you're probably writing something expository, versus if you have highly connotative word choices and you're writing subjectively, then you're probably writing persuasively. Okay? We'll get more into that when we look at some specific examples. So tone supports purpose. If the writing again is subjective, you want to create a highly emotional state, right? If you're going to convince someone of something, you want to make them angry. If you're angry, you want them angry. If you're excited, you want them excited. So authors use really strong word choices to evoke emotions out of their readers so that they can get their readers to agree or to do something. In objective writing, it's only to help you understand something, which again is mostly exposition. So objective writing, so in general, suggests an attempt at being objective about their topic. So they're just trying to present just the facts. If you think of most newspaper articles, they're trying to just tell you what happened, right? And that's more objective than the editorial page where they're trying to make you mad or make you happy or excited about something. So remember, tone supports purpose. Okay, so what is bias? So if an author is using super connotative word choices and they're writing subjectively, then they have a bias. And a bias means that it's the way in which you enter the text. So for example, if you're writing about like a highly controversial topic, let's say for example abortion, and you grew up in a very conservative home and you believe that any kind of abortion is murder, then you would enter a writing, like if you were writing about abortion, you would enter that writing already feeling that way. So you would probably use really highly connotative word choices when you are talking, right? And so bias is when facts are slanted to reflect the author's personal beliefs. it's negative because it sounds like you're being narrow-minded, where point of view suggests thoughtfulness and openness. Now, bias isn't necessarily a bad thing. If you feel very strongly about something and you want to convince someone to agree with you and you enter with a bias, well, it's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. It's really the job of the reader to pick up on the bias and so that they can decide what to do with it, whether they're going to let that convince them or whether they're going to look into the information more. So it's really important for readers to understand if an author is biased. Again, being biased isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it's something to recognize. All right, so an objective text would be super straightforward and use really denotative words. Now, denotative words are words that are just dictionary definition words. They don't have any kind of emotional weight behind them. So you're thinking of words like, for example, like child, right? The word child just means a young person. It doesn't mean anything else. So if you're referring to a young person and you call them a child, that's a very objective word. On the other hand, if you're feeling very upset at that child, you might call them a brat. And that word sounds very biased and subjective. And so then you would not be straightforward anymore. You would have a bias, which we call a slant. And I'm going to show you that on the next slide. A slant, when we slant, if you call a young person a brat, you would be slanting towards a negative view of the child and away from that denotative view of them just being a young person. Now, there's also connotative word choices that are positive. So if you called them an angel or baby or kiddo or words like that, those are more positive, which would be slanting towards a very, good impression of the young person and away from them being a brat, right? So again, word choice implies a bias. That's a slant. And if you can think of just the way the word sounds, if that word is slanted, then it's towards and away from something, and you need to figure out what that is. All right, now fact versus opinion. I know that you feel like you know that really well, and you do, but when we get into complicated and complex texts, it can be hard, and so you have to remember all the time, facts can be verified, and opinions are statements of feeling or judgment. It's important to make sure you understand that difference, because when a writer is writing about something really hard, you have to be able to determine which is which. And please know it's all interconnected. A writer's bias will influence their word choices. Again, if they're entering a conversation, let's say they're writing on the other side of abortion and they're very much pro-choice, then that bias will influence the word choices that they use when they're writing about abortion, right? And so the use of highly connotative word choices then convey the tone and suggest the purpose. So in other words, if I'm pro-choice and I'm writing this essay, then I'm probably going to use really highly connotative words about a woman's right to choose, which will convey my maybe angry tone at people protesting a Planned Parenthood clinic, and that would be my purpose to convince. Just like on the other side, if I was pro-life, I would be using words like murder and butchered and really strong words, so to get across the point that I'm angry about abortion, so that would also be a persuasive essay, right? Because I'd be trying to convince you to agree with me on the pro-life side. So writer's purpose then will lead to their claim. So it all goes around in a big circle. It's all connected. You can't have a highly objective text that's trying to convince someone of something. Facts do not change the hearts and minds of men. You need emotions to do that, right? And so if your purpose is persuasive, you're going to have to be highly connotative and subjective and biased in order to do that. All right. Now, I'm going to pause the presentation here because Screencast allows 15-minute videos. This allows you to take a break before we get into Slater in Chapter 5 and how quieting the mind will examine it for all of those concepts.